A waitress's rude comment backfired when the nobody she mocked turned out to be her boss. It was a Saturday night in Pasadena, California, and the Golden Fork was packed as usual. The place buzzed with the energy of clinking glasses, laughter, and servers darting between tables. Among them was Lexi, one of the most confident waitresses on staff. Known for her quick wit and sharp tongue, Lexi prided herself on being able to handle any situation the chaotic dinner rush could throw at her. That evening, a particular customer caught her eye as he walked through the door. He was a large man, dressed simply in a button-up shirt that strained slightly against his stomach. His face was friendly, but his posture revealed discomfort as he glanced around the bustling dining room. Lexi's eyes flicked to the man's movements, noting the effort he made to maneuver through the tight rows of tables. She smirked to herself. "Table for one," he said politely to the host. His voice was calm and kind, almost out of place in the frenzy of the evening. The host led him to a table near the corner, the only available spot. Lexi noticed the way he hesitated before lowering himself into the chair, adjusting it slightly to accommodate his size. She felt an unkind thought bubble up, but kept it to herself for now. After all, the dinner rush wasn't the time to be distracted, but Lexi was always one to entertain herself, even at others' expense. And tonight, with the stress of a packed house, her patience for subtlety was thin. Her co-workers often laughed at her cutting humor, but it occasionally went too far. She brushed those moments off as part of her charm. As she made her way to the man's table to take his order, she noticed the faint hush that fell over the nearby diners. They had noticed his struggle to adjust his seat, a moment that seemed amplified in the crowded room. Her smirk deepened. She wasn't going to let this pass without saying something. "Good evening," she began cheerfully. "Looks like you've made yourself comfortable. Took a little effort, huh?" The man glanced up at her, his expression unreadable. She thought he might laugh it off, but instead, he smiled politely. "It's a nice place," he said simply, his voice even and calm. Lexi blinked, caught off guard by his lack of reaction, and quickly moved on to take his order. As she walked back to the kitchen, her co-worker nudged her. "What did you say to that guy?" they whispered, half laughing. Lexi shrugged with a grin. "Just giving him a little extra service." But what Lexi didn't know was that this quiet man was not just another customer. He was about to teach her a lesson she would never forget. As the dinner rush continued, Lexi found herself passing by the man's table several times. Each time she couldn't help but notice how he sat, his large frame making the small chair look even more uncomfortable. She exchanged knowing glances with another server, suppressing a laugh as she carried a tray of food to a nearby table. When she returned to check on him, she decided to let her sharp tongue loose. After all, a little humor never hurt anyone, right? "Still doing okay over here?" she asked with a saccharine tone, tilting her head. Without waiting for a response, she added, loud enough for nearby diners to hear, "You know, we've got a chef's special tonight. Dessert in moderation. Might be worth a try." A ripple of awkward chuckles rose from a couple seated nearby. The man, however, didn't flinch. He looked at her for a moment, his eyes calm but steady. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying an almost unsettling kindness. He then returned his attention to his meal, meticulously cutting into his steak. Lexi walked away, feeling a mix of satisfaction and confusion. She was used to getting a rise out of people, whether it was laughter or annoyance, but this man gave her neither. She shook it off, chalking it up to him being too shy to respond. Meanwhile, the couple at the nearby table exchanged uneasy glances, whispering to each other while darting looks in the man's direction. The tension began to ripple across the room. Some diners had overheard her comment and were now stealing glances at the man, who remained composed, eating in silence. The waitstaff too seemed to sense that something about this exchange was off. One of Lexi's co-workers approached her cautiously. "Hey, maybe you should take it easy on that guy," they whispered, nodding discreetly toward the man's table. "I mean, he didn't even say anything. Feels a little Mean, you know. Lexi rolled her eyes. Oh, come on. It's just a joke. He's fine. If he can't take a little humor, that's on him. She waved the concern away, her confidence unshaken. But the way her co-worker hesitated before walking off left a small pang of doubt in her mind. One she quickly pushed aside. As the man finished his meal, he sat back in his chair, wiping his hands with a napkin. His actions were slow, deliberate, and oddly composed. Lexi noticed him glancing around the room, taking in the ambience as if he were evaluating it. She dismissed it as a quirk of his personality and went back to tending to other tables. But then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. At first, Lexi didn't think much of it. People were always checking their phones at dinner. But as she glanced back at him from across the room, she noticed something different. He wasn't scrolling or texting. He was making a call. Her curiosity piqued. She watched as he spoke quietly into the phone. His face remained calm, but there was an intensity in his posture that hadn't been there before. The call lasted less than a minute, and when he hung up, he sat back with the same serene expression. "Hey, did you see that?" one of her co-workers murmured, leaning over the server's station. "What's he doing? He's been way too calm after, you know." Lexi shrugged, though her stomach began to churn. Something about his demeanor was starting to bother her, but she brushed it off. "Probably calling his mom or something," she quipped, trying to lighten the mood. But deep down, Lexi had a nagging feeling that this wasn't over, and she was right. About 10 minutes after the man had made his call, the front door of the restaurant swung open. The shift manager, Carlos, walked in, his face unusually tense. Carlos rarely came in on Saturdays. His off days were sacred. But tonight, he moved with a hurried energy, scanning the room until his eyes landed on the man in the corner. "Is everything okay?" one of the servers asked him quietly. Carlos barely acknowledged the question. "I'll handle it," he said under his breath, and approached the man's table. Lexi, who had been polishing glasses at the bar, watched with growing curiosity. She leaned toward one of her co-workers, whispering, "Why's Carlos here? Did someone complain?" Her co-worker shrugged, equally clueless. The man stood up as Carlos arrived, and the two shook hands like old colleagues. They exchanged a few words, too quiet for anyone to hear, but Lexi noticed something strange. Carlos looked nervous. Very nervous. His usually easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced with the kind of stiffness that only comes with trying not to mess up in front of someone important. Her stomach dropped a little, though she didn't quite know why. She put down the glass she was polishing and tried to focus on her tables, but she couldn't help stealing glances at the man and Carlos. Finally, Carlos turned toward the rest of the staff and clapped his hands together. "Hey everyone," he called out, his voice shaky but loud enough to be heard over the restaurant's buzz. "I need all staff to gather in the back dining area for a quick meeting. Right now, please." A murmur spread through the servers and kitchen staff. Meetings during a dinner rush were unheard of, and the abruptness of it sent a ripple of anxiety through the team. Lexi felt a knot forming in her stomach, but kept her usual confident smirk. "What's this about?" she muttered to another server, who simply shrugged. As the staff trickled into the back dining area, they found Carlos standing next to the man, whose calm smile hadn't wavered since the moment he walked in. The waitstaff stood around awkwardly, exchanging confused looks, while Carlos took a deep breath. "This," he began, gesturing toward the man, "is Mr. Harrison." The room fell silent. Lexi's smirk froze in place as her brain tried to process what she'd just heard. Mr. Harrison. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. Carlos continued, filling in the gaps. "Mr. Harrison is the new owner of the Golden Fork. He's been here tonight observing the restaurant, seeing how we run things, and getting a feel for the team." Carlos paused, looking around the room with an almost pleading expression, as if begging the staff to behave. Lexi felt her heart drop into her stomach. The pieces started to come together. His quiet observation, the phone call, his composure after her snide remark. She felt a bead of sweat forming on her temple. Mr. Harrison finally spoke, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "Thank you, Carlos. I appreciate the introduction." He turned to face the staff, his eyes sweeping across the room before landing briefly on Lexi. She felt the weight of his gaze and looked down, her smirk long gone. "I bought this restaurant because I believe in its potential," he began. "I believe in creating a place where people feel welcome, where the food and the service are equally excellent. But tonight, I saw something that deeply disappointed me." The room was so silent that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. Mr. Harrison's words were steady, measured, but they carried a weight that made everyone feel small. But what he said next made Lexi's stomach drop even further. Mr. Harrison took a step forward, clasping his hands in front of him as he addressed the room. His expression remained calm, but there was an unmistakable edge in his tone. "When I walked into this restaurant tonight, I wasn't expecting perfection. I understand how chaotic a busy Saturday night can be. Mistakes happen, and that's part of the business. But what I didn't expect, what I refuse to tolerate, is disrespect." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. The staff exchanged uneasy glances, most of them looking anywhere but at him. Lexi, standing near the back of the group, felt like all the air had been sucked out of the room. She kept her head down, hoping against hope that he wouldn't single her out. But deep down, she knew what was coming. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone," Mr. Harrison continued, his voice softening slightly. "But when one of my employees makes a customer feel small, when they mock someone who's done nothing but sit down to enjoy a meal, that's a failure of everything this restaurant is supposed to stand for." Lexi's cheeks burned. She could feel the eyes of her co-workers darting toward her, though no one said a word. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of a nearby table, trying to keep her composure. Mr. Harrison's gaze swept across the room again, settling on her for a moment before he spoke. "To the waitress who made the comment tonight," he said, his tone firm but devoid of malice. "I want you to understand something. Words have power. A joke, no matter how harmless it might seem to you, can cut deeply when it's aimed at someone's vulnerabilities. And the truth is, I've heard jokes like that all my life." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She looked up at him, her usual confidence replaced with a mix of guilt and shame. He wasn't yelling, and he wasn't angry, at least not outwardly. But the disappointment in his voice was far worse than any raised tone could have been. "I'm not here to punish anyone tonight," Mr. Harrison said, his eyes locking with Lexi's. "But I need everyone in this room to understand that this restaurant isn't just about food. It's about the experience we create for every person who walks through that door. And that experience starts with respect." Lexi's throat tightened. She wanted to say something, apologize, explain herself, anything, but her words felt trapped. She nodded slightly, unsure if he even noticed. Mr. Harrison turned to Carlos. "Effective immediately, I want every employee to undergo additional training on customer service and workplace respect. And as for tonight, I expect you to have a one-on-one conversation with the waitress in question about what happened." Carlos nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Harrison. I'll take care of it." The room remained silent as Mr. Harrison glanced back at the staff one last time. "I hope this is the last time I ever have to address something like this. You're all part of this team, and I expect you to uphold the values this restaurant stands for." With that, he gave a small nod and walked out of the back dining area. The tension lingered like a heavy cloud as the staff slowly began to disperse. Lexi stayed behind, frozen in place. She felt the weight of what had just happened settling over her, heavier with each passing second. Carlos approached her quietly, his expression unreadable. "You know we need to talk," he said simply. Lexi nodded, unable to meet his eyes.
But as she sat down with Carlos, she realized this wasn't just about her job. It was about the kind of person she wanted to be.
After the meeting, Lexi sat alone in the break room, her head in her hands. The sounds of the bustling restaurant beyond the door seemed distant, muffled by the weight of her thoughts. She replayed the events of the night over and over in her mind. The man's calm composure, Mr. Harrison's words, and the way her co-workers looked at her. For the first time in her career, she felt truly ashamed. Carlos entered the room, pulling a chair across from her. He placed a glass of water on the table and sat down, leaning forward slightly. "Lexi," he began gently, "we've all had moments where we let our emotions get the better of us. But tonight, you crossed a line." Lexi nodded, unable to argue. "I know," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." Carlos raised a hand to stop her. "Intent doesn't erase impact," he said firmly but kindly. "I know you like to joke around, but you've got to remember, we don't know what someone's going through. That man didn't deserve the comment, and honestly, neither does anyone else." Lexi sighed deeply, her chest tight with guilt. "I didn't think about it like that," she admitted. "I was just trying to, I don't even know. Be funny, maybe. Make the night go by faster?" Carlos nodded, his expression softening. "I get it. But Mr. Harrison's right. This place is about more than just serving food. It's about making people feel welcome, respected. Every single person who walks in here deserves that, no matter what they look like." For the first time that night, Lexi allowed herself to sit with her guilt. She thought about Mr. Harrison's words and how deeply they had resonated. He wasn't angry. He didn't yell or humiliate her, but his calm, measured disappointment cut deeper than anything else could have. "I need to apologize to him," Lexi said finally, her voice shaky but resolute. "I don't know if he'll accept it, but I have to try." Carlos nodded. "I think that's a good start." The next day, Lexi arrived early, hoping to catch Mr. Harrison before the restaurant opened. She found him in a booth near the back, reviewing paperwork. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. What I said last night, it was uncalled for, and it was wrong. I wasn't thinking about how it might affect you, or anyone else." He set down his papers and studied her for a moment. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. "Thank you for saying that, Lexi," he replied. "I appreciate the apology. But what matters most is what you do moving forward. This isn't just about one moment, it's about how we treat people every day." Lexi nodded, his words sinking in. "I understand, and I'm going to do better." Over the weeks that followed, Lexi made good on her promise. She worked on being more mindful of her words and actions, not just with customers, but with her co-workers as well. The entire staff underwent training on respect and customer service, and the atmosphere in the restaurant began to shift. The team felt more united, more aware of the impact they had on the people they served. For Lexi, it wasn't just about keeping her job. It was about becoming someone she could be proud of, someone who lifted others up rather than tearing them down. The experience changed her, not just as a waitress, but as a person. The lesson was simple but powerful. You never know what someone is going through or who they truly are. A little kindness can go a long way, and a thoughtless remark can leave scars you may never see. To those watching, remember this. Whether it's at work, at home, or with strangers, choose respect. It costs nothing but means everything. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Let's keep spreading stories that remind us of the power of kindness.